Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Hahn, and I am facilitating the Monday afternoon webinar series for Corwin Press. Welcome to Collaborative Leadership, presented by Peter DeWitt. Now I'd like to turn it over to Anna Messick, the Marketing Manager at Corwin, to introduce our presenter today.
Welcome to Corwin's Monday afternoon webinar series. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Peter DeWitt. Peter was a school principal for 8 years and a teacher for 11 years in upstate New York. He writes the Finding Common Ground blog for Education Week and is the author of several books, including his newest book, Collaborative Leadership. Peter works in the UK, North America, and Australia, and is a visible learning trainer for John Hattie, an instructional coaching trainer for Jim Knight, and he does his own work on collaborative leadership.
Just want to say thank you for all of you who are coming live and for those of you who are registered who are actually going to pick up the recorded version of this. I am psyched to see some of my friends on here like Leah Whitford in Wisconsin, so I'm feeling really good to see her. Thank you, Leah, for joining. My friend Patty Skiba from my hometown of Albany, New York. I'm presently in Texas. I just finished a day of Foundation Day working with John Hattie all day. It was just the two of us working with Texas ASCD, and one of the reasons why I love talking about John so much is because he's been a huge supporter of my work, but somebody who has completely changed, sort of inspired me to look deeper into the different things we do in education, like leadership. So that's why I started writing the book Collaborative Leadership, 6 Influences That Matter Most, and it just recently came out a couple of weeks ago with Corwin and was co-published with Learning Forward. My first question for you is, do you have a collaborative mindset? And this is where John has been sort of hugely sort of inspiring to me because of the fact that it's very often we say we have a collaborative mindset, but we actually really don't. To collaboration to many leaders, unfortunately, and I've sort of seen this more and more over the past 2.5 years that I've worked as an author and consultant, is that they say they have a collaborative mindset, but it actually means they just want people to collaborate with them under their own idea. So a collaborative mindset is really about walking into a venue like a faculty meeting or a principal's advisory council, which is a stakeholder meeting, with a mindset of you have one thing that you have on your mind, but you're walking out with a much better idea after working with the group. And it needs to be a diverse group of stakeholders that are there. So first and foremost, it's really important for us to have a collaborative mindset and to understand that collaboration is really about coming together individually, but working as a team and coming up with better ideas to help the school community. Another big friend of mine that has inspired me quite a bit is Jim Knight, who I work with as an instructional coaching trainer. Between John, Jim, the work of Russ Quaglio, which you're going to see later on in the presentation, and then my own ideas from being a teacher and a school principal, I often wonder about the engagement that we have. In our instructional coaching work, we talk about engagement. Is it authentic or is it compliant? And we ask the same thing when we're doing visible learning. Typically in those moments when we're talking about whether our engagement is authentic or compliant, we're looking at teachers and students, but quite honestly, when I started writing this book and working with John so closely, John and I talk every week. I write for Education Week, so I've been fortunate enough to break John's work down into 1,100 words or less in blogs. And I've gotten to do some editing of John's papers behind the scenes, that it really started making me think about this idea that it's not just between teachers and students that we need to look at engagement and authentic engagement versus compliant engagement, but also how we work with parents as well. Because sometimes I think that in the parent community, in our school community, we do a lot of compliant engagement versus authentic. So the whole idea behind collaborative leadership is this, and I'm going to give you a minute to read the slide. I won't read it for you. So one of the things that I really started looking at was this idea that it was more than instructional leadership when we're talking about collaborative leadership, and it was more than just transformational leadership, something that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes as well. But it's about those purposeful actions that we take to really listen. You know, I go back to Stephen Covey's work from time to time with, are we listening more than we talk? So let's start with this. This is my basic premise from working with lots of leaders in a few different countries these days, and also really getting an understanding of Hattie's work. But I feel like we have maybe 4 different types of leaders, and what I don't want you to be confused about when you're looking at this is just because you might find yourself in one category, it doesn't mean you're doomed to stay there for the rest of your career, or at least I hope you're not doomed to stay there for the rest of your career. So let's start with the bottom right-hand corner. We talk about bystanders. Those are people that don't define a goal, nor do they inspire collaboration. In many cases, they actually want to be told what to do. Hang out in the office, and believe it or not, there are leaders that are like that, that sort of let the staff overrun them. There's a difference between the right amount of autonomy and way too much autonomy. And bystanders typically let the staff sort of run the building. The faculty meetings are not very engaging, and they're just trying to be managers more than anything else. On the lower right-hand corner, you've got regulators. And, you know, regulators I find very frustrating because they have a lot to do with low levels of self-efficacy and those pieces that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes as well. But regulators kind of define the goal and they dictate what should be done. They check your lesson plans, even though they're not giving feedback on the lesson plans that they're checking. And things are mostly based in compliance more than they're based in any deep sense of why are we doing what we're doing. And if I've learned anything from John Hattie, it's that we have to understand our impact. We have to have this kind of collaborative sense to be stronger. And regulators are more along the lines of, this is the mandate, these are the accountability measures, and this is what needs to be done, regardless of whether it's good for teachers or students. On the upper left-hand corner, we have negotiators, and this is pretty typical. It happens in schools where a principal walks into a faculty meeting with one idea and walks out with the same one. They build consensus. They have private conversations. They're also the people that have the meeting after the meeting, which I can find very frustrating because for me, I feel like if there's something important enough to be said after the meeting ends, shouldn't we be having it during the meeting? So negotiators kind of go through and they build consensus. And then we've got collaborators. And they're the ones that co-construct goals, something I'll talk about in a little while. But they co-construct goals with their staff. And they're driven by open communication and transparency. You know, in John's work, we talk about making learning visible. And he and I have talked a lot about that. It's about making it visible to parents and teachers and students. And not sort of have this, you know, you've got the greater school community and then you've got the inner group that's supposed to know everything. Collaborators don't work that way. They don't have, I think they have a stronger self-esteem where they feel like they can walk in and they're not there just to drive the conversation. They're there to learn from the people that they're working with as well. One area that I've always sort of been confronted with, I guess, is when I am doing visible learning trainings, when I'm doing instructional coaching trainings, or even working school climate and safeguarding LGBT students, those kind of things. I will often hear from leaders who say, well, we don't have the time to be able to do that. And my thing is, we actually do have the time, and it might mean that we have to use those venues that have often been sort of a waste of time for staff and make them much more applicable for the people that are part of the school community. So the 3 areas that I find that matter most, that I talk about in the book, and I actually give a lot more of practical information in the book, are faculty meetings, teacher observations, and then also the whole idea of family engagement. So you know that I call it 6 influences that matter most. So let's start with the first one, which is instructional leadership. You will notice that there's a number that goes along with each of the 6 influences, and that's because they're based on John Hattie's research. Now, when John came out with visible learning in 2009, he had 138 influences. A few years later, he had 150 influences. And then a couple of months ago, he was up to 195. And lo and behold, I present all day with John, and he's saying that he's up to 250. So it's the great part about his research is it's always ongoing. It is always being very current, which I think is what makes my book a little bit different, because I work very closely with John, and as opposed to reading about his research second or third hand from others, I've been fortunate enough to work and learn with John, and he's a mentor and a friend. So when you see the effect size, which is what that number is up on top, what the effect size, for those of you that don't know about visible learning and John's research, is that anything with a 0.40 or above, if it's got a 0.40, that represents a year's worth of growth for a year's input. So anything over that 0.40 is going to provide more growth. So when we're looking at something like instructional leadership, when it comes to students and teachers, it can provide a 0.42 effect size, which that is all of the research that he has collected, which involves over 300 million students and something like 1,800 meta-analysis. So instructional leadership, we know, for those of us who have recently gone through, excuse me, our instructional coaching or our instructional leadership training, we hear a lot about instructional leadership. So it's these things that are on the screen that I'll let you read. So you've got things like creating an inclusive, safe, and engaging environment, and being visible and engaging. But also exploring data collaboratively, not holding it to yourself. And also with a focus on learning. And there are a few things that I want you to be able to walk away from with this webinar alone, but also from the book as well. Do you have a focus on learning? Because Hattie wrote a paper a couple of years ago that I was fortunate enough to edit about the politics of distraction. And in there he says we focus so much on adult issues, but we don't focus enough time on learning. Do you focus on learning? Is that a part of your faculty meeting? Are those the conversations that are happening in the hallway, or are they solely based on behavior? One of the most important reasons why instructional coaching or instructional leadership is so important is because of information like this. This comes from that research paper, The Politics of Distraction, that I just mentioned from John. It focuses on within school variance. Very often, as you're reading this, I will talk out loud. Very often what happens is that we compare our schools to other schools. And what the PISA results, when it specifically talked about reading, what that says from 2010 is that the variance between schools is 36%. So my elementary school in comparison to your elementary school is 36%. But the variance within schools is 64%. So that means that we need to stop worrying about our school in comparison to another school and be more concerned about the variance between our highest flying teachers and those in the need of most growth. So what do we need to do to change this whole idea of within school variance? Well, we have to shift the narrative. John says it best. He says that when you're a principal, if you're walking into a classroom and you sit down with a student and you want to know what it is that they're learning, don't say, and this was something that I used to say when I was a principal and I had to change it, when you sit down with them, don't ask them, what are you doing? Because that focuses on the activity. The better question is to say, what are you learning? That is shifting the narrative. When you agree on what a year's progress looks like, imagine the faculty meeting conversations you could have. When I'm talking about a 0.40, meaning a year's worth of growth and a year's input, do you have those kind of conversations as school leaders, as teacher leaders, as instructional coaches? You have to understand your impact. That doesn't just mean, hey, teachers, we're going to check your impact on state testing and how your kids do. That means, what do formative assessment and summative assessment look like? For instructional coaches, it's not just what impact the teachers have on the students that you worked with. For instructional coaches, it's what impact did you have on the teachers that you worked with? Because there are very specific ways that you can do that. And for school leaders, what sort of things, what sort of interventions did you take to have more of an impact on not just those teachers in need of most growth, but also the whole idea of those teachers who are high flyers, which makes me want to drop to the bottom one, which is link autonomy to a year's progress. If there's a teacher that has shown a great deal of growth from the evidence you've collected, give them more autonomy than the teachers who need more help, and they're not showing the growth that's necessary. Don't treat them all the same. Let your high flyers keep flying by giving them autonomy based on the evidence they've collected. When you've got those teachers who are in need of growth and their evidence is showing their students aren't making growth, give them less autonomy, because I'm sorry, they need more of an intervention. The other thing that we have to look at is those teachers in need of most growth might not just be based on the fact that they're poor teachers or anything like that. Part of this is because they might be somewhat, there might be an issue because of their level of self-efficacy that they're dealing with. So what you can look at in front of you is the research of Ashton and Webb. I actually got this from a doctoral dissertation by a researcher named Rachel Eels out of Loyola University. But what this looks at, and the whole idea of collaborative leadership, but also instructional coaching, all of those are tightly wrapped around this idea of self-efficacy. Teachers with low teaching self-efficacy don't feel that teachers in general can make much of a difference in the lives of students, while teachers with low personal teaching efficacy don't feel that they personally affect the lives of students. So we have teachers that are coming in that don't feel like they have an impact on the students in front of them. That is self-efficacy, and that's why collective teacher efficacy is so important. In order to raise self-efficacy, which when teachers have a very positive sense of self-efficacy, that can have a 0.63 effect size. And this is something that this is part of John Hattie's research. So self-efficacy is the confidence or strength of belief that we have in ourselves that we can make our learning happen. When that happens, when that whole idea of self-efficacy happens, 0.63 effect size, which now you understand the 0.40 being a year's worth of growth for a year's input. 0.63 is over that hinge point of the 0.40. So where does that move to? Well, we look at instructional leadership, and we look at what instructional leaders are supposed to do as far as, co-constructing goals and talking about learning. And we move into the second of the 6 influences, which is collective efficacy, also known as collective teacher efficacy. That is a 1.57 effect size, so almost quadruple the 0.40 hinge point. And collective teacher efficacy is actually John Hattie's new #1 in his list of 195 influences, but also his newer list of 250 influences that he has recently started talking about. And when I say recently, I mean today, because I get to present with him. So this whole idea of collective teacher efficacy is hugely powerful. So what does that look like? How do we do it? It's great to have it out there, but what does that mean? Well, collective teacher efficacy, some of the ways you can do it is provide professional development that is co-constructed with staff. So I had a building stakeholder group that we called PAC, Principals Advisory Council. We co-constructed what we wanted to learn at faculty meetings. And that stakeholder group was representative of the different groups that were within our school. So we looked at things like feedback, professional development, or even evidence-based observations were a part of what we co-constructed together, and that I found resources for them. The more we talk about these issues that we need to talk about, and think about John Hattie's whole idea of shift the narrative and talk about learning, the more that we're going to get some of these teachers to feel like they can share their level of expertise. This is going to help raise their status as teachers so that self-efficacy piece raises up, and we can get them to share their best practices, and that's going to help build collective teacher efficacy. One of the ways that we do that is through this idea of professional development. Professional development has a 0.51 effect size. So this is number 3, and it's above the 0.40 hinge point. Now I want you to keep in mind that I'm not looking at Hattie's top 10, and I'm not looking at Hattie's top 6. What I did when I picked 6 influences that matter most was that I purposely wanted to choose the ones that I thought would give school leaders, teacher leaders, instructional coaches the biggest bang for their buck. Professional development is one of those areas that gives the biggest bang for your buck. A lot of us have seen these slides already. Perfect. I survived another meeting that should have been an email. It's something to keep in mind as we move forward from faculty meetings. I was hugely responsible for doing this. I came from a school where if faculty meetings ended at 3:30, we still had to sit in the same room until 4 o'clock because we were contractually obligated to be there. So my first thought when I was a principal was that if the meetings are going to be 20 minutes, I'm going to let you go in 20 minutes because I don't want to waste your time. And what I ultimately ended up doing was telling teachers that a faculty meeting is still a waste of time because everything I talked about could have been emailed. The other reason why I started to really look deeply at faculty meetings, which to me is part of professional development, is that in New York State, where I was a school principal, we were going through a great deal of accountability and mandates. And what I wanted to do was make sure teachers understood that they had a voice and that it wasn't just about a checklist. It was about coming together collaboratively around these ideas like feedback and evidence-based observations so that we could really talk about these deep issues without never really going deep about them. Because when we don't talk about these issues in a faculty meeting setting, then what we do is build resentment among staff, which actually leads more to this whole idea of a low level of self-efficacy. One of the ways that I did this was by flipping. So for those of you that know the work I've done in the past, flipping leadership was always something that was really huge for me in my last few years as a school principal. So for example, you can see where it says send an article, a blog, a video, or whatever to stakeholders before a meeting. Because we co-constructed an idea like feedback, then I would find resources about feedback. I would only find 1 or 2 because you don't want to overwhelm people. I would send it out and say, please read it before we come to the faculty meeting. And please bring examples of what your student feedback to students actually looks like. That's just one example. They can view it at leisure before the meeting and then come prepared to have a deeper conversation. I am not going to lie to you and tell you that every single teacher was just jumping on board saying, woohoo, can't wait to read all of this stuff before we go to a faculty meeting because I have nothing else to do. That is not at all what was happening. There were some teachers that were overwhelmed. What I found is that I had to find ways to be able to engage them. And if you co-construct goals with them, they're going to be a little bit more engaged in the faculty meeting process. So, you're probably wondering about some places to focus. But I'm actually not going to show you that screen until I stop talking at my screen in my hotel room in Texas and get some questions from you. Please feel free to ask me some questions, and then I can talk to you about them as we move forward. So I'm going to give you 1 minute, and I want you to start thinking about a question for me, please. Okay, please don't let this be an epic fail, because I know we've got people on here, and keep in mind, there's going to be a larger audience that will be listening to the taped version, so don't leave me hanging here. I'm not going to, you know, I don't want to put Leah Whitford on under the microscope here, or my friend Patty. Nothing yet, huh? Okay. Up. How do you do these kinds of meetings when you may not be fully supported by upper administration? Oh, Leah, that is a great question and so worth waiting for. You were leaving me hanging there, though, Leah. I think that's a really great question. One of the reasons why I did do the flipped faculty meetings is because I felt like there were so many accountability and mandates coming at us in New York State that my teachers felt like they lacked a voice. My upper administration was not always supportive, and it was, you know, there were a variety of reasons why. Sometimes it's because other administrators are not doing it, so they're getting some pressure because Peter is flipping his faculty meetings and we're not. So sometimes there can be pressure to stop you from doing that because you're like the odd man doing something or not. I find that for me, it was important to just keep moving forward because, you know, I don't think you always need to have support of upper administration to be able to do a couple of these things like, you know, like flipping faculty meetings or even the where to focus that I've got in front of you now. In a minute, I'm going to talk about observations. And I think that there are some simple things that you can do to build up your teacher voice at the same time that you're making some of these things more relevant. And then, you know, you don't necessarily need upper administration for that as well. I think also that question to me is a little bit deeper in the way that, to me, it means, you know, how is it that, how can we live within the box that we're given? Michael Folan, I saw him in New Zealand one time, and I've known Michael for about 5 years now. And one of the things Michael Folan said was, just because you're stuck with their policies doesn't mean you need to be stuck with their mindset. And I think I found that I had been stuck with the mindset. And what I'm hoping to convey to all of you is that you can take some of these pieces, and it doesn't matter whether you have upper administrative support, because they're things that are good enough for you to be able to do on your own. So thank you for that question.
I just sent you another question, Peter, that just came in.
Oh, yes, Patty. So Patty says, what can we or I do to encourage leaders to try to do a flipped faculty meeting, or teacher leaders to take the initiative to offer a topic and the flip materials to send out to staff? I think the best thing that you can do, Patty, is offer up a reason why. So when I'm doing instructional coaching work, and even when I'm doing collaborative leadership work, for me it's, why is what I'm offering so much better than what they may be doing? What Jim Knight refers to that as is easy and powerful. Are you offering something that's easy enough for them to do that they'll want to take the step to do it, but powerful enough that it's going to change their practice? And I think that's what you have to look at. So make it less about a gimmick and focus on, why is a flipped faculty meeting something that's important? Now, Patty, one of the things that you can do is bring in this research about self-efficacy and collective teacher efficacy. Collective teacher efficacy has such a high effect size that the faculty meeting in your school is clearly one of the easiest ways to build that, through getting people to share staff or share materials. So that's one of the ways to be able to do it. And hopefully, by talking to the leader about collective teacher efficacy, what I'm hoping that happens is that you start to build this culture where staff feels like they can share resources with each other as well. But to go back to the basics, talk to your principal about collective teacher efficacy, talk about how faculty meetings are the greatest place to be able to start it and start looking at how do we co-construct these meetings together. What is your, I guess to me too, is what is your current reality and how will flipped faculty meetings help you? If your current reality is that you're not doing a really good job with feedback, meaning across the school, then the flipped faculty meeting is the best place to go about having that dialogue. So I hope that helps you. Some of the other areas to focus for those of you who are leaders, instructional coaches, teacher leaders, whatever, is that areas like surface level and deep level questions. At a faculty meeting, imagine the questions, the conversations you could have over surface level versus deep level questions. Or this whole idea of growth versus fixed mindset. In Hattie's research, he finds that the growth versus fixed mindset has about a 0.19 effect size, which is well under that hinge point of 0.40. So one of the reasons why he found that in the research is that we talk to kids about a growth mindset, but we treat them in fixed ways. So we'll say things like, kids, you have to have a growth mindset. Now go over to your ability group, and by the way, that's where you're going to be stuck. And by the way, that might not be the appropriate group for you, but you need to have a growth mindset while you're there. So this whole idea of people that say, I have the growth mindset, really look at that and say, do you have the growth mindset, or do you expect kids to have it, but they're a little bit sort of, they're in this box because they're being treated in a fixed way. Negative versus positive interactions. That's a big thing for instructional coaching that Jim Knight has talked about. This whole idea of negative versus positive interactions is really important, because as teachers, are we having more positive than negative interactions? I think Jim Knight says something like, for every 5 positive, there should be 1 negative, as opposed to for every 5 negative, there should be 1 positive. And then non-instructional versus instructional conversations. How many times do you walk into a classroom and there are non-instructional conversations that are happening? And that doesn't mean that every minute of every day has to be instructional conversations, but you should see a majority of the conversations focused on instructional conversations. The next one is feedback. It's a 0.75 effect size. So it's nearly double the hinge point. Feedback is really important, and as you know, that's one of the things that I flipped with my faculty meetings. Now, the whole idea of feedback is that we often treat kids in a way that we give them praise, and as leaders, we often give teachers praise, and we don't necessarily give them feedback, especially in areas like teacher observation. So feedback is something that's really huge. So let's look at it from a collaborative teacher observation, and this is something that I created, and that John Hattie was kind enough to edit and give his input. So the whole idea behind this, and I want you to keep in mind, I want you to look at like the beginning of the year. Keep that piece in mind. What very much happens at the beginning of the year is that we start getting into this, it just becomes this crazy busy time because it's the first month of school. The very first thing leaders should be doing with teachers is sitting down and saying, in a couple of weeks, I want you to come back and talk to me about what your goal is this year. Instructional strategies, growth mindset, whatever it might be. What is your goal for this year? And if a teacher says, oh, I don't know, I don't know what goal to work on, principals and teachers work together and co-construct the goal. One of the things that I hate, that I've heard so often in the 8 years that I was a school principal and the years that I was training to be a school principal, is that, ooh, you're going to the dark side. I hate hearing that, because I don't think we should be considered going to the dark side because we're in a principalship. I think we need to change the principalship to look like a collaborative leader who is not on the dark side, but on your side. And that means that maybe we co-construct the goal together. And then when a principal goes in, maybe for a formal observation, they observe student learning and teacher instruction. They sit down next to a student and say, so what are you learning about today? As opposed to what are you doing, like I was talking about earlier. And then they give and receive feedback based on that goal that they co-constructed. Now, what we know about feedback is that it only sticks when it's wrapped around a goal. So why not work on a goal with a teacher before you go into an observation setting to be able to give them feedback? You find resources on whatever it is. Maybe it's an instructional strategy like increasing student engagement. Well, wouldn't it be great if your principal gave you a couple of blogs that they read about, or a book, or a video on the teaching channel, or something like that to say, hey, I came across this whole idea of building student engagement through this method. I thought you'd want to watch the video. Here you go. And finding resources that way. And then going back in to observe again. So make it more of a cycle, because this whole idea of observation should not be a one and done. It should be a constant cycle. Now, I realize there's going to be pushback and say with teachers unions and these kind of pieces, bargaining, collective bargaining, I think what we need to be able to look at is that, yep, some of this might be a part of the observation process, that formal observation process. But why is it that we have to, why not find resources and then not do a formal observation by observing again and not making that part of the formal piece, but still making that part of the feedback you're giving? I mean, there's schools that do walkthroughs, and 7 people walk in with clipboards with a checklist that the teacher never sees the other side. That's frustrating. So maybe we co-construct a goal, the principal goes in to observe, and then they provide feedback, and then they find resources to help, and then they go back in again later on and they see the improvement that happened. I think we need to stop looking at observation as a one and done and make it more of an observation cycle that is ongoing. Learning is ongoing. It's not a one and done. So those observation pieces, the faculty meeting pieces, they should also be a part of a cycle as well. The 5th of the 6 is assessment capable learners. This is also from John Hattie's research. For a very long time, this was the #1 influence. It is a 1.44 effect size. And that's hugely powerful. That's more than 3 times the hinge point that I was talking about before. Assessment capable learners doesn't mean that these are students that do well on assessments. It means they can assess their own learning. They know where they are, they know how they got there, and they know where they're going to next. That's assessment capable learning. Those are the students that you sit down next to and say, ask them what they're learning, and they're able to answer what they're learning and what it's tied to and where they're going to next. And you do that through providing learning intentions and success criteria, something I get into in the book. We don't have a lot of students in the assessment capable stage because of this. This comes from the work of Russ Quaglia, Quaglia. And Russ gave me permission to always use this slide, and this is his aspirations profile. In the lower right-hand corner, you've got students who are in the hibernation stage. There's students that have no positive goal for the future, and they put in no effort toward the present. In the upper left-hand corner, you've got students in the imagination stage. Those are students who know how to set a goal, but they don't know where work goes there. So I'm in Houston, Texas, so let's play football here. Those are students who want to be professional football players, but they actually don't play football. You've got students in the lower right-hand corner. Those are students in the perspiration stage. They work really hard in the present, but they have no goals for the future. And then you've got students in the aspiration stage, and those are students who know how to set goals and they know the work that needs to be done to get there. Now I want you to think of one thing. This is 4 distinct boxes, but I want you to keep in mind that if we're truly going to have a growth mindset, that means that students in the hibernation stage are not doomed to be there forever. That's a conversation principals, instructional coaches, teacher leaders need to have with their colleagues, because very often when we see a student in the hibernation stage, because they usually have that same last name of siblings that we've had in the past, or, oh, I know their parents, when students are in the hibernation stage, we force them to stay there. And I think we need to be able to stop doing that. I will be perfectly honest and give you a personal story. I was in the hibernation stage. I am a guy that I was retained in 4th grade. My dad died when I was in 5th grade. My mom went back to get her GED when I was in 6th grade. I was a sub-sophomore. I was sitting in a freshman homeroom, 2 years older than my peers, and I used to sneak out of homeroom so my friends didn't see me because those who did called me stupid. And then I graduated ranked 262 out of 266 from high school. And I failed out of 2 community colleges. It wasn't until I got to my 3rd community college, and I only went there because I was a long distance runner, that I met a coach named Ron Molson who looked at me and said, I need you to go into the Learning Assistance Center if you want to run with us. And I walked into the Learning Assistance Center, and I walked in with a 1.7 GPA, and I walked out that semester with a 3.86. I was in the hibernation stage. So when I talk about kids in the hibernation stage, I was one of them. You are not doomed to stay there forever. So let's keep that same mindset for the adults that work in a school. When I started out this presentation, I talked about self-efficacy and how there are teachers who have a low level of self-efficacy. Those are teachers that are in the hibernation stage. They should not be doomed to stay there, and they should not be made to feel badly about the fact that they have spent time there, because I think all of us have spent time in each one of these quadrants. And luckily, by some grace, we were able to find our way out of it, whether it was a peer, somebody that inspired us. We need to be the people to inspire them to get out of the hibernation stage and the perspiration stage. That's why we need to work on professional development and co-construct these goals for observations. We need to increase teacher voice. This profile really matters for students and adults, and it's directly tied to self-efficacy, collective teacher efficacy, feedback. And it's definitely tied to collaborative leadership, which means that we want to work with them. We have this servant mindset. We don't want to put ourselves above them from status. We want to help them grow because it's reciprocal learning for us as well. Next will be, so I'm going to have, there we go. I knew it was going to move one way or another. The other reason why we have to look at things like hibernation and those kind of pieces, and this is one of my favorite new quotations by Fisher, Fry, and Hattie from their Visible Learning for Literacy book. 6th graders who are held to 4th grade expectations will be great 5th graders when they're in 7th grade. The gap never closes. I was that kid. I was that 6th grader who had 4th grade expectations. We need to be able to close this gap, and we do it by focusing on assessment capability and goal setting and those pieces as well. I want to give you a little bit more of Russ Quaglia's research before we move into parent engagement and then ultimately wrap it up. So Russ also gave me permission to use these slides. Now this is student voice, and Russ has surveyed hundreds of thousands of students. And in the student voice survey that he did, and I'm asking that you please take time, if you have time, to look up Russ's research, because it's hugely powerful. But what you can see is 47% of students have a voice in decision making at school. This is a student voice survey that students filled out. They believe that 47% of the students have a voice in the decision making at school. They believe, 52% of them believe that teachers are willing to learn from students. So that's just over half. And that 50% of the students surveyed say, I know the goals my school is working on this year. If we increase student voice, if we increase the status of students, if we do a survey, and instead of saying, student perspective, and actually listen to it and try to change some of the things that appeared in the survey, this is what can happen. Students will be 7 times more likely to be successful in school when we do that. I'm going to give you one more. When they surveyed about a sense of purpose, 93% of the students surveyed said, I believe I can be successful. 76% said, teachers believe in me and expect me to be successful. 71% of them said, I believe I can make a difference in the world. And 34% said, teachers know my hopes and dreams. Only 34% said, teachers know my hopes and dreams. If we focused on purpose, if we asked students, what is your goal? We know that goal setting has more than a 0.50 effect size. We need to not just do it with adults. Why are we doing it with students? Because when we focus on purpose and we focus on these things on the screen in front of you, students are 18 times more likely to be successful in school. How can we not do that? So some of you may be asking for some other practical advice, which are, what are the strategies we can use with students? Well, here are some of them. Student expectations, just got done talking about. RTI, 1.07. So for those of you that are doing RTI correctly, look how huge of an effect size that has. Because we're thinking about 0.40 is the hinge point that has a year's worth of growth and a year's input. That has 1.07. Classroom discussion. Teachers, stop talking. Actually create an engagement, an authentic engagement, where you can have classroom discussion where students are asking questions as much as teachers are. Feedback, you already saw. Reciprocal teaching, when students are teaching each other. Yes, this takes front loading, and it takes us teaching them how to do it, and it needs to be wrapped around learning intentions and success criteria, but imagine the impact you can have. That's more than 2 years worth of growth if we allowed our students to be a part of the discussion and we allowed them to teach reciprocally to each other. You've got acceleration. That's where students skip ahead. If they already know the information, why are we making them do it again? 0.68. Study skills. I just got done telling you my background. Study skills, huge. That's what saved my life. Some of the other ways that we encourage student voice. In my school, when I was a principal, we had kids club. And you see this in front of you. Each teacher and staff member had a group of kids from K to 5. We met, when it first started off, we were meeting twice a month for about 15 minutes each. And we followed those kids. The kids that were in kindergarten, we followed them all the way up to 5th grade, so they tried to stay with the same adults. It made our community even smaller. It also increased student voice because we talked to them about their hopes and dreams and what they wanted to learn. You can see we met bi-weekly for 20 minutes. Sometimes it was 15, other times 20. Student-led conferences. Many of you probably do this already, or you've read about it, or you used to do it, and you got away from it. Student-led conferences, huge impact in getting students to understand that what they have to say has value. Student-led conferences is huge. Common languages. I actually do a lot of work in safeguarding LGBT students, but what's good for LGBT students is good for any minoritized population or anybody. What are the common language that we have? In our visible learning work, we create learner dispositions together. So it's 5 to 7 words that focus on learning, like resilience or persistence, those kind of things. Create a culture where these words are used by students, teachers, and parents. And then speaking of parents, we're going to finish up with family engagement. It has a 0.49 effect size. And just so you know, if you looked at family engagement just from a special education standpoint, that 0.49 goes up because the effect sizes that you see on these influences are averages from the meta-analysis that John Hattie collected. So this 0.49 is an average. So parents, I actually flipped my communication. And why? I did it on a whim. It was right before open house, about 3 days before open house, and we had the Common Core State Standards starting and the Dignity for All Students Act starting. And one of the things that I wanted was to make sure they knew about it. So I created a 5-minute video, and I flipped it out through our parent portal, which we were using at the time, Edline. And I honestly did not think a lot of parents would watch it, but in the video I had said, you're going to be meeting with me for 20 minutes at open house. I want you to come with questions. And I had given snippets on what the Common Core was and what Dignity for All Students Act was, which was our anti-bullying legislation. Within about a half an hour, I started hearing from parents that I didn't often hear from who said, we work every day. This is awesome. Can't wait for the open house. I had standing room only with people raising their hands for 2 years in a row at the end of the year. Each year, when I sent out a survey to parents, parents said, I can't imagine you communicating any better. It's because I took a chance. I had a community where I felt like I could. And I started sending out information. John Hattie always talks about, let parents in on the secret of school. Don't just brand your school, although that's important. You need to have dialogue. You need to send these things out before a PTA meeting so parents will come prepared and want to talk with you. Are you going to get to 100% of your parents? No, but parents talk. I went from like 60 to 65% of the parents signed up for Headline when I first started flipping my parent communication to about 85%. So parents talk and they don't want to miss out on that information. Still send home the one-page refrigerator page, but try something like flipping. How are you opening up your school walls and making this transparent? And it can't just be from sending stuff out with a hashtag on Twitter, although important. It has to be, what information are you sending ahead so you can dive into deep dialogue whenever you're together. And there's nothing more important than when you're standing on the front sidewalk welcoming kids and parents in, that when a parent says, do you have a minute, to be able to talk to them as well, or at least set up a meeting with them. So we need to make sure we're engaging parents because we know that that has a huge impact on student learning. And the last thing is, we shouldn't be going in different directions. Have all of your structures align. Faculty meetings, principals advisory council meetings, grade level meetings. Are you focusing on that same goal? Is it tied to the district initiative? If the district initiative is that important, which is usually pretty wide open, what are you doing to fit into that? And are you having these conversations to show how important they are? So make sure your structures are aligned. I'm going to take questions at the end. I know that I did a lot of talking at you because it's a webinar. I have my Twitter address here. I have my email address. You can always reach out to me privately. So I'm going to give a minute. Do you have any questions for me? Okay, awkward silence. I think I'm good. So what I'm going to do is I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your night wherever you are in the country. And I know that I had some people say that they were going to be joining from other parts of the world. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of the webinar, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching the recorded side of this too. And I hope you have an awesome night. Please keep in touch.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Can you advance to the next slide, please?
Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, so just as a special thank you for everyone who attended today's webinar, we are offering a 20% discount on collaborative leadership when you order using the discount code on the screen. If you're interested in learning more about Peter's books or his workshops, you can learn more on our website at corwin.com. And we hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Do we have any questions coming in? So I'll make sure I don't cut anyone off.
Actually, we did have a couple of questions come in.
Okay, so I am seeing, well, thank you.
I have one in front of me. Why don't I read it to you?
Sure.
What are your thoughts on whole brain learning as a focus? What research data might be beneficial for this?
Oh, good question. So I'm going to turn this a little bit. You know, I think, I don't know if John has any research on whole brain learning. I know that there are different strategies to go along with that. I think that the best thing that you could do for the person asking the question is I would actually turn that on you and say, that would be, what a great topic to be able to discuss among staff if you happen to be a school principal. Because I think that that's one of the things. Let me try to give it to you another way. So sometimes we throw out these things, so it's really hard for me to answer like whole brain learning. What I hear sometimes when I'm hearing that is, are we throwing it out because that's the new phrase we want? Or are we actually, what does that look like? What does whole brain learning really look like? And finding research behind that. And what are the strategies that go along with whole brain learning? So for me, if I was a school principal and instructional coach, asking that question and something that would be interesting to talk about as a staff, I would throw out, what does whole brain learning mean to you? Bring a couple of resources or show some resources on it, and then have teachers bring examples of whole brain learning. Because my biggest thing is, whatever it is you're going to do, whatever it is you choose to do, make sure that you have a common language to go along with it. Jim Knight asked a really great question in instructional coaching. If I was to ask you to paint a picture of what student engagement looks like, or what student engagement is, what would that look like? And that would be the same thing I would say to you. What kind of question are you saying to your staff to say, if you could paint a picture of whole brain learning, what would that look like? And have the staff talk about it. So I hope that helps.
Terrific. That's all the questions that have been posted.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time.
All right, thank you. And I just wanted to remind everyone to, if you enjoyed today's webinar, we have several more upcoming webinars featuring experts like Michael Fullen and Charlotte Danielson, and you can check our website for the upcoming dates and speakers. And thank you everyone for joining us for today's Monday afternoon webinar on a Tuesday. Good night.